there's one final international window for the United States women's national team. And we've chatted a little bit about, United States going up against Germany. And there's going to be some games coming up this week and this weekend. And we'll chat more about that with you all in a separate episode. But there was an announcement that was made for the United States women's national team. They're looking ahead to 2023 already. And we've got public information about the January camps. A little bit of a twist, a little bit of a unique twist in this one. The United States women's national team is headed to New Zealand for January. They're going to be participating in their annual January camps, and there will be friendlies involved in this one. If people do not remember, in the previous January camp this year in 2022, it was just an extended training camp. There were no friendlies that were attached to that. They just participated in the She Believes Cup coming out of those January camps, but that's not going to be the case for this one as they ring in the new year for 2023 and look ahead to the World Cup. A couple of friendlies against World Cup co-host New Zealand.
Yeah, this is huge. I mean, when we look back to the World Cup draw and we saw that the United States group stage matches, all of them would be played in New Zealand. One of the first topics that we talked about, Sandra, was the fact that the United States has never played a match in New Zealand. Last November, they went to Australia and played a pair of friendlies. So this is not at all a surprising announcement out of US Soccer with the US women's national team, because they are now going to play the World Cup games in New Zealand. So of course they're going to get out there and play their first ever matches in New Zealand for the US women's national team. So they'll get to New Zealand. They'll actually train for a couple days. That's how the January camp goes. It's usually a bit longer. It's a little bit more extensive. It's a little bit more intense than regular training camps. So they'll train for 6 days, and then the U.S. will play against New Zealand on January 18th in Wellington at Sky Stadium. That match is going to be at 4 p.m. local time, but that's actually January 17th, 10 p.m. Eastern time in the United States. Then again, they'll play on January 21st at Eden Park. That game is also going to be 4 p.m. local, which means it's going to be January 20th in the U.S. at a 10 p.m. kickoff. And I think I'm mentioning the locations of these matches because that's incredibly, incredibly important, because the United States will then travel to New Zealand and play at those two stadiums again for the World Cup in just a few months. So the way that this lined up for the United States, the way that they were able to schedule this is like 2 claps for them, because this is fantastic. Not only are they playing in New Zealand while they'll be playing, but at the exact stadiums, at Sky Stadium, and then again at Eden Park, which is huge. Eden Park is a huge, huge stadium, 50,000 fans. Like, it's New Zealand's national stadium. It's hosted a lot there. So that's really fantastic to see that they'll be getting out there. But it's the first ever venue for the New Zealand women's national team at Eden Park. So, I mean, it's like a double entendre for the U.S. It's a great thing that they're going there, and then they're also playing in the stadiums and against the host nation.
No, I'm with you. I think it's a bit of a trial run, quite frankly. It's an opportunity for the team to sort of circle, they could circle it on their calendar. It's something for players to look forward to. Yes, they're going to close out their calendar year in 2022 against Germany and have, deservedly so, a bit of an off season to finally take some time off, but they've got something to look ahead to. That's not just a training camp. This is one that's going to have games attached around it and against the World Cup co-host. And we talked a lot about the World Cup draw that they were part of, and it's good to see that they're gonna really get a run out in facilities and in cities and markets, right, that they're going to spend some time in for the World Cup. So I think it's going to be a good test for them. I know as the games get closer, we'll have training camp rosters for both teams to take a look at, and we'll take a look at some of the crossover between players who are going to play internationally and players who play for club and NWSL, and it'll be an interesting timeline to pay attention to. I think I know folks are always going to look at the numbers, and those are helpful, and you're going to look at a top ranked team like the United States and perhaps like the historical record against New Zealand, how United States typically, has the number, right? Has New Zealand's
Yeah.
number pulled, and their majority of the time have led in the all-time series, I believe, against this team.
Yeah,
I think most
17-1-1
and most
US
recently,
versus
most recent is the Olympic game, that group game, where they kind of got stomped a little bit, but it was a little bit of a
and
mix.
the She Believes Cup, right? The
Yeah,
She Believes Cup in 2022, that was in California where it usually takes place. The US beat New Zealand 5-0 in that match. But yeah, I mean, it definitely history to be played between these two sides. It's also because, yeah, not only the crazy time change, a 4 p.m. game to the day before a 10 p.m. game Eastern time, but it's also because of where New Zealand is located. When the United States goes there in January, it'll be summer for New Zealand. But when they play in the World Cup, it'll be winter and chillier temperatures. So it's like a little backwards in terms of that, but honestly, like that's the only thing I can think of that's like
yeah.
off a little bit.
And honestly, like, good prep for us too, like
Yeah.
good prep for like anybody that wants to, try to take in the 2023 World Cup live. You're gonna have to start getting used to seeing, when the times actually match up and when the dates actually match up, right? Like you mentioned, like while it will be January the 18th, a 4 p.m. local kickoff, it'll be January 17th, 10 p.m. Eastern, if you're watching, from the United States. So practice for everybody involved. So I'd love to see it a little bit more on the U.S. soccer side of things here. A recent announcement for U.S. soccer and the task force that they are implementing in light of the Sally Yates investigation, independent investigation, with the full report, findings, and recommendations. The announcement of Mana Shim as chair of the task force to prevent the abuse and harassment that was discovered and further detailed in the Yates report. So good to see a big name like that. I think folks are at this point who have been following this are is a name that they are familiar with. Manashim, one of, unfortunately, the many players who had to come forward with their truth about their experiences within women's professional soccer. But not just Manashim. Listed within this, a couple other names, notable names, sort of joining along with this task force.
Yeah, so Mana Shim will be the chair of the task force, but also serving alongside her will be Shannon Box, former U.S. women's national team midfielder, and then Greg Smith, who is the Maryland State Youth Soccer Association executive director. So they're going to join Shim on the leadership of the task force. But then so that's the leadership. And then there's this entire group members that are joining Shim, Box, and Smith, including current former players from U.S. women's and national teams, U.S. extended national teams, representatives from the MLS, USL, youth, adult member organizations, players from the NWSL, president of the NWSL PA, directors of strategies. There's a lot of people listed on this task force. Some of the notable names I'm going to shout out: Erin Chastain, Tierna Davidson, U.S. player, Chicago defender; A.D. Franch, Kansas City goalkeeper; Naomi Girma, San Diego defender; Lauren Holiday, former player; Tori Huster, she's with Washington Spirit; Alex Morgan, Golden Boot winner; and then Yale Averbush West, who's also the GM of Gotham and a former national team player. So there's a lengthy list of names and people represented on this task force to develop the action plan in order to put the suggestions from the Yates reports and implement that with the board of directors for the U.S. soccer members, including the youth clubs. They're going to gather best practices across the sports regarding safeguarding policies, identifying the biggest concerns, developing educational resources. I mean, there's a lot that this task force is going to tackle, and there's a lot of people that are involved in it. And I think like Naomi Girma, her name being on this list, doesn't surprise me at all, but I love that she is one that has spoken up and said, hey, I want to be involved in this. I want to use my voice, use my leadership skills to put a stop to this horribleness.
Yeah, I think that having somebody like Manashim as the task force chair, and then somebody like Shannon Box as part of the vice chairs, but also somebody like Greg Smith as part of the vice chair. I like that within some of the task force members as well, that there are people across the board who have experience with youth soccer in this country specifically, because very, very sadly, one of the things that came out of the Yates report was, the fact that this is how, that it's all systemic, and that this actual report was very specific and focused on women's professional soccer, but that how everything had, connections to each other, and that Yates ultimately, alluding to the fact that this goes much deeper. It goes through to youth soccer. So it can't just, it's important that this is a task force that's for safety in general, not just for women in professional soccer, but that there are people on this, with ties to youth soccer, because, the youth absolutely have to be protected as well. So important to have things like this implemented, and I would imagine that we're going to continue to see, varying levels of different types of solutions, hopefully,
Yeah.
to try to target these areas. So congratulations, absolutely, are in order to Mana Shim and everyone involved in this as well.